What if Cleopatra's most extraordinary secret was not her beauty or her romantic life, but a hidden power history has tried to erase? We all have heard her stories. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was a queen known for her dazzling beauty, sharp intelligence, and infamous romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her life was a tale of politics, seduction, and tragedy. But what if I told you that's only half of the story? What if, beneath the silks and the palace intrigues, lay something far more dangerous? Something the Romans never wanted to remember? Cleopatra was not just a queen of beauty and intelligence. She was the ruler of a naval empire so powerful that it could have rewritten ancient history. Her ships stretched across the Mediterranean. Her power spread across the sea. But why don't we hear about it? Because after her fall, the victors crafted the story in their own words and buried this chapter completely. But today, we are diving deep into this forgotten aspect of Egypt's empire. So, prepare yourself to challenge everything you thought you knew about the last pharaoh of Egypt. The Hidden Fleet, Cleopatra's naval might. When most people imagine Cleopatra, they picture luxurious palaces filled with wealth, and Cleopatra dressed in silk, flaunting her legendary beauty. They associate Cleopatra with just beauty and a tragic romantic life. But the real thing they forget is her mighty power. Her power stretched far beyond the walls of Alexandria and extended into the open waters of the Mediterranean. In the ancient world, the sea was not only used for trade purposes, it was also a battleground that decided the fate of empires. Whoever had control over the Mediterranean had control over everything. They were the rulers of the sea, and Cleopatra wanted to be the ruler of the sea. When we hear the story of Cleopatra, this chapter of her life is not mentioned. Why is her mighty naval power ignored too often? Because people do not know about it. They have not heard about it. Roman historians and writers were our primary sources from which we could learn about this aspect of Cleopatra. But they preferred to focus on her love affairs, portraying her as a seductress instead of a serious ruler. They painted her not as a leader, but as a distraction, someone who seduced Antony and opposed Rome through passion, not strategy. But the evidence tells a different story. It was Cleopatra's intelligence and tactics that made her a powerful ruler. Cleopatra's power was not limited to land only. She wanted to conquer the seas. That's why she focused on her naval power to rule over the Mediterranean. She inherited one of the largest fleets from her ancestors and expanded it further. It was not an ordinary fleet. It was a strategic force that could challenge Rome's dominance on the seas. Her fleet protected Egypt's independence. It was like a sword she used to behead her enemy of the sea. And Cleopatra's ships were another majestic thing to consider. These ships were a true reflection of power. They were not confined to the Nile River. They sailed across the Mediterranean, projecting Egyptian power into Cyprus, Syria, and beyond. But the million-dollar question is, if her naval power was so strong, why don't we remember it? Because her greatest enemies wrote history. Her rivals wrote the history in their own words to erase the threat she posed to Roman dominance. According to Roman writings, she was the queen of seduction and passion instead of the queen who commanded one of the largest fleets of her age. But if we overlook Roman writings, we will see a different image of Cleopatra. Then it will be clear that she was not just the queen of beauty, she was the queen of power in her time. She knew that Egypt could not survive with only wealth and alliances. It has to rule over the sea to become a threat to its enemies. This was Cleopatra's hidden fleet, the dimension of her reign that history nearly forgot. But Cleopatra's naval strength was not built overnight. It was the product of centuries of Egyptian seafaring and the ambitious expansions of her Ptolemaic ancestors. To understand her fleet, we have to go back to where it all began. Building the arsenal, Egypt's naval legacy. Power needs time to build, and Egypt's naval power was also built over periods of time. It all began with a long-standing Egyptian tradition that dates back thousands of years. From the earliest dynasties, Egypt was a land of ships. The Nile was not just a river, it was a lifeline. It carried grain, soldiers, and trade from one kingdom to another. That's why Egyptians had to master seafaring. They also became master boat builders. At first, they crafted simple reed rafts. Later on, they built wooden vessels capable of long journeys. By the time of the New Kingdom, Egyptian ships were crossing the Red Sea, sailing into the Levant region, and bringing home treasures from distant lands. Maritime power was a part of Egypt's DNA. When this tradition reached the era of Cleopatra, it had evolved into something far more advanced. But let's go back to the origins of Egypt's fleet. We will know the groundwork of Cleopatra's ancestors to build a formidable fleet. They recognized that Egypt's wealth and security depended on the sea, so they expanded their fleet, constructing war galleys in shipyards along the Nile and in Alexandria. The Ptolemaic fleet was the naval force of the Ptolemaic kingdom, and King Ptolemy I founded it. In that time, its main naval bases were present at Alexandria, Egypt, and Nea Paphos in Cyprus. Ptolemy I knew the worth of maritime supremacy. After him, his son Ptolemy II also focused on the same strategy. He expanded the Ptolemaic navy into the Hellenistic world's largest navy. After the victory of Ptolemy II during the First Syrian War, the Ptolemaic kingdom constructed a huge navy. As a result, the Ptolemaic navy was successful in repulsing both the Seleucid Empire and the Kingdom of Macedonia for control of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean. According to ancient Greek records, it is said that Ptolemy II had a fleet named the Alexandrian Fleet. This fleet had 336 warships. These ships were so large that they were described as floating cities. Other than the Alexandrian fleet, the Ptolemaic kingdom also had an Aegean fleet, Nile River fleet, and Red Sea fleet. They were not just weapons in sea battles. They were a symbol of complete dominance. The legacy of such a massive fleet continued until it reached Cleopatra's era. But what made her stand out was her personal investment. Cleopatra was unlike other rulers, who left military matters to their generals. She was directly involved in these matters. She inherited ships, along with an entire infrastructure consisting of shipyards, supply chains, and a maritime force, and she used them intelligently. Cleopatra did not treat her navy as ceremonial or symbolic. She treated it as the backbone of her empire. Evidence suggests that she actively expanded and modernized her fleet, making sure it could stand against Roman naval forces. But the question is, why was this so important? Why was it important to rule the sea in her time? Because the Mediterranean Sea was the chessboard of her time. The sea was used for trade purposes. Having control over the sea meant having control over the trade, and having control over the trade meant having control over the wealth. In many ways, Cleopatra's arsenal was the last significant bloom of Egypt's naval legacy. Her ships were a true reflection of innovation, an evolution from Nile barges to Mediterranean war machines. With the foundations laid by her ancestors, Cleopatra now had command over a massive and powerful fleet. The ships of the Nile and beyond. Cleopatra's ships were more than just a symbol of Egypt's glory. They were war machines, carefully crafted for supremacy in both rivers and the open ocean. Her enormous ships had strategic diversity that established them as one of the most powerful naval forces of their era. Cleopatra did not rely on one kind of vessel. At the center were the great polyremes. These were the war galleys that tested the limits of ancient shipbuilding. They were massive vessels. Some of them had as many as 5 or more banks of oars. Armed with bronze rams at their fronts, they were capable of destroying enemy vessels with immense power. The ship's decks were wide enough to accommodate hundreds of soldiers, turning each boat into a floating fortress. The other type of vessel, the quinquereme, had special importance in Cleopatra's naval might. It could carry up to 300 rowers and dozens of marines. On board, towers were often constructed to provide archers and artillery teams with an elevated position, allowing them to launch projectiles during battle. These vessels were enormous in size, but Cleopatra's fleet did not focus on size only. Next to these giant ships, there were also smaller and faster vessels known as biremes and triremes. These ships served as scouts, escorts, and raiders. Their agility allowed them to maneuver bigger vessels, disrupt enemy formations, and chase down fleeing opponents. This balance between heavy war galleys and small vessels provided her navy with strength and adaptability. Technology provided Cleopatra's fleet with a vital advantage. Egyptian shipbuilders used technological advancements to build these vessels. They utilized both local customs and Hellenistic advancements to refine hull structures that could withstand long voyages across rough Mediterranean waters. Strengthened timbers, strong rigging, and carefully crafted keels made these ships suitable for longer campaigns. Maintenance of such a fleet was not an easy task. Hundreds of ships needed constant supplies of ropes, sails, wood, bronze fittings, and above all, manpower. Every galley required trained rowers. Most of these rowers came from a diverse population of Greeks and Egyptians. For the proper functioning of the vessel, it was also necessary to train sailors and marines because a ship had to work as a single, synchronized unit. Therefore, every rower, every soldier, and every person on the boat had a vital role to play. The network and crew of these ships depended on the resources of the Nile Valley. Grain nourished the crews, papyrus ropes rigged the sails, and bronze and a special kind of wood were imported from abroad. This was important to maintain the fleet. For Cleopatra, these vessels were more than defensive assets. They were the tools to stretch her power across the sea. Only the thought of seeing Cleopatra's fleet was enough to shake the enemy's soul. Only the sight of Egyptian sails on the horizon could create chaos in regions. This was Cleopatra's navy, a diverse, technologically advanced force that made her not only the queen of the Nile, but a true ruler of the sea. But here's the twist. A fleet's power is not measured in its size or design. It is measured in how it performs in battle. No doubt Cleopatra's fleet had unmatchable power, but its test in the war shifted the narrative. Battles and blunders. Cleopatra's navy was built for strength, and it was always active. But what did happen at the Battle of Actium? Before the battle, Cleopatra used her vessels to control key territories, such as Cyprus and parts of the Levant. Her ships transported soldiers, protected trade routes, and served as a constant reminder to her enemies that Egypt was a powerful kingdom. But the actual test came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium. It was one of the most famous naval encounters in history. On one side, there was Octavian, the future Augustus, with his experienced man, Marcus Agrippa. Octavian had a fleet with 400 ships. His fleet mainly had Liburnian vessels. Their ships were lighter and faster. On the other side, there was Mark Antony and Cleopatra, with their massive triremes and unbeatable navy. They had a fleet of 500 ships. Cleopatra's ships were massive floating fortresses designed to frighten and dominate. Towering decks were swarmed with soldiers, and their strengthened hulls were capable of surviving anything. However, what appeared to be an advantage on the water became a disadvantage in reality. The large size of the ships made them less maneuverable than Octavian's ships. On the other hand, Agrippa's smaller vessels darted in and out of formation, striking quickly and retreating before Cleopatra's larger vessels could position themselves. Shortly after midday, Antony was forced to extend his line from the protection of the shore and finally confront the enemy. Seeing this, Octavian's fleet set sail. Antony had hoped to use his biggest ships to drive back Agrippa's wing on the north end of his line, but Octavian's fleet knew this strategy. That's why they stayed out of range. Then Antony attacked, and the battle began. The battle turned into a war of endurance. Cleopatra's fleet, heavily armed but slow, became stuck. Things did not happen as expected. Morale began to decline, and command coordination broke down, and Octavian's forces intensified their attack. Then came the most controversial moment of the battle: Cleopatra's retreat. Roman historians claimed that she panicked and left the battlefield, abandoning Antony in the moment of greatest need. Through Roman propaganda, her image was changed into a cowardly queen. But modern historians have other beliefs. Some said that her retreat was pre-planned. It was a strategic move to preserve a core squadron of her best ships. Others noted that she was trying to escape the surrounding forces and regroup. Whatever the case, things did not go well after that. Antony followed her and left much of the fleet leaderless. The result of the battle was disastrous. Without coordinated leadership, the fleet collapsed under Roman pressure. By the end of the battle, Octavian was victorious. The consequences of the battle were devastating. Cleopatra's powerful fleet, the Shield of Egypt, was destroyed. The survivors of the battle were captured and enslaved. Cleopatra's retreat transformed the image of Egypt's most excellent defense. Actium was more than just a clash at sea. It signaled the close of a chapter for Egypt's influence in the Mediterranean. The great naval power that once projected strength across the region was broken, and Rome rose as the dominant force on the waters. For Cleopatra, this event marked a turning point that brought her reign to an end. Within a short time, Alexandria fell, and Egypt's independence was gone. Though her navy was defeated, it left a lasting influence on maritime history. Legacy of the Seas: Why it Matters. Cleopatra's navy might have lost power after the Actium battle, but its significance never vanished. To understand the importance of her navy, we need to move past the Roman propaganda that portrayed her as a tragic figure of beauty and scandal. We need to see what kind of strategic ruler she truly was. The Mediterranean was not just a body of water. It was the world's economic and military highway. Whoever controlled it controlled the trade routes, and Cleopatra knew it. She expanded her inherited navy not just to protect her empire, but also to extend her power across the sea. Her navy was more than just a collection of ships. It was a statement that Egypt was a powerful kingdom, capable of challenging its enemies. Rome was afraid of Cleopatra, not because of her beauty, but because of her power. Her ships were powerful and could deny trade routes to Rome. That's why Octavian worked so hard to erase her naval legacy. Rome could not match her power, which is why it did not acknowledge her. Romans regarded her as a tragic woman of love rather than a strategic leader. But when we overlook Roman propaganda, Cleopatra emerges as something much more powerful. She was not just surviving in a man's world. She was playing the same game of power like Caesar, Pompey, and Octavian. And for a specific period of time, she played it really well. If the Actium battle had turned out differently, the Mediterranean history might have been different. Imagine if Cleopatra and Antony had emerged victorious. Things would have been different for Cleopatra and Egypt, and she might have ruled not only as the last pharaoh of Egypt, but also as the unmatched queen of the sea. In that case, Rome's dominance might have been delayed or even prevented. But even in her defeat, her fleet left a mark. It left a lasting legacy of Cleopatra's power as a ruler. History often remembers women for their love lives and scandals, and Cleopatra is also remembered for that. She is rarely remembered as a commander, strategist, and a leader of a fleet. For centuries, her power has been overshadowed by the Battle of Actium and the drama of her death. But when we deep dive into her story, she emerges as one of the most significant challengers of the Mediterranean. Her naval power mattered because it revealed the truth of her reign. Cleopatra was not only the last pharaoh of Egypt, she was one of the last rulers who dared to stand against Rome. She did so not with whispers in her palace, but with sails and oars. In the end, Cleopatra's navy was more than ships on the water. It was the statement of her power. Though the Battle of Actium sealed her fate, the story of her fleet reminds us that she was more than a seductress in Roman propaganda. Rome may have tried to erase her legacy. Still, The echoes of her ambition continue to resonate like waves throughout history. If you enjoyed learning about Cleopatra's naval power, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to share this video and subscribe to our channel so you can catch new stories about the hidden strengths of historical figures.